we're doing is only a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made up of many drops. And if we can approach it in that way, then who knows how far we can get.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond Funding. Today we're joined by Julian Atkins, Net Zero Programme Director for the Church of England, and we're going to be talking about the wider issue of climate change and how churches can really do their part to help make a difference. So Julian, it's absolutely lovely to have you on the podcast. How are you?
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we get into talking about, the actual work that you're doing within the Church of England, I thought it'd be really good to give context in terms of how the church views the global climate emergency and what the situation actually is.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have 5 marks of mission as the Church of England, and the 5th mark of mission is safeguarding God's creation. And so the Net Zero programme is very centred in that element of mission. But we also care about unjust societies and transforming societies into more just structures and thinking about those who are impacted by climate change around the world. And we see evidence of that on the news every day. And we also have a responsibility to support those who are in need. And for those who are experiencing the impacts of climate change, it's important to us. So that's why the church is so committed to its net zero programme, but also the environmental challenges that we see all around us.
And you've had sort of experience, haven't you, within the sort of environmental sector for a while, haven't you? So what's your kind of view on what's going on at the moment and, what the urgency of the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I've come from a long career in local government and looking at environmental and built heritage conservation. That's my background. And I've seen the impacts that has on natural systems. We're seeing challenges around biodiversity. We're seeing the impacts of climate change on wildfires, on impacts in the sea in terms of coral reefs bleaching. So the evidence is out there, and a lot of the analysis is irrefutable now. I think that we are, as humans, having an impact on the climate. And that's why I'm so keen to be doing everything we can through the Church of England to play our small part in reducing our carbon footprint as one element of that response.
Yeah. So following on from that, could you tell us a bit more about the Church of England's commitment to achieving net zero? And we touched upon it lightly, but kind of what really motivated that goal?
Yeah, I think that what motivated it was our marks of mission that I've just talked about in terms of caring for those who are in need, transforming society to more just structures, and then safeguarding creation fundamentally. So that's what's driven the church in its response. In 2020, the church established a commitment to be net zero by 2030. And in 2022, we published our route map to net zero, which is setting out the milestones and the steps we need to take at a national level, at diocesan level and at a parish level to respond to the challenge. And behind that, then, the church has established the net zero programme, which I'm the director for. And has put some funding from the church commissioners. The church commissioners very kindly have submitted substantial funding to the programme, and we're using that to enable and pump prime and encourage everybody to play their part in the Church of England community.
For those people that maybe aren't as familiar with the term, what does net zero actually mean?
In its simplest sense, net zero is about not emitting more carbon than you can remove from the atmosphere. Everything we do in our daily lives, and the church is no exception, has a carbon footprint to it. So in running our homes, in going to work or school, in running services in churches or community outreach programs, that all has a carbon footprint. And if we can reduce the amount of carbon that we're consuming, then we're reducing our footprint. And for those elements that we can't achieve in terms of reducing the footprint, if we can find other ways of removing carbon, and people will have heard of the term carbon offsetting, there's some challenges around whether that's a good thing or not, then that gets you to net zero. Our drive at the moment in the programme is to reduce our carbon footprint as much as possible, because that's where we think we will have the biggest impact. And we've made a clear choice in the route map that we will not seek to offset any more than 10% of our emissions. But for many churches, a lot of churches, the smaller churches, I live in a rural community, the churches in my benefice are probably relatively low carbon already. So for many churches, it's only going to involve simple things in terms of taking steps. For the bigger churches, the more active churches that have more going on, then bigger projects might need to be made to achieve net zero. So I think my key message is for parishes not to be afraid, we've got to find all this money to deliver net zero. In some cases, the projects that are needed will cost money, but that's what the programme is there to try and help and support. For many churches, just taking simple things, taking simple steps, can start to have a big impact.
So what is, because you said you were quite early on in the stages of this programme, and it's going to take a while, but I wondered, what is the kind of overall vision for the future, and how will the work that you're doing have a positive impact on communities but also kind of future generations?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It's a big question, I am aware, yeah.
I think we have one eye in mind on the 2030 ambition, and we see this as a journey. We want to see how far we can get in that journey between now and 2030. 2030 won't be the end of it. The route map makes it very clear that there are other things in terms of our procurement processes, the goods and services that we buy, and how we operate more broadly as a church beyond just how we heat and power and light our buildings. There will need to be work continuing after 2030, but this next 6 or so years will inform what that looks like. But by making these small changes, I think every step makes a difference, and small things collectively can make a big difference. If we all do one thing and those one things add up, someone in one of our videos that we've just done said, what we're doing is only a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made up of many drops. And if we can approach it in that way, then who knows how far we can get. The thing is to have the ambition, because if we hold up our hands and say, it's too difficult, we'll never reach it. And
hopefully, it will help that when, as a government level, we're moving towards that goal as well, because I read somewhere that the government's hope is to be net zero by 2050. So hopefully that trajectory is going to keep going, and there's going to be more and more talk about how everyone can reach net zero, how everyone can do their bit.
Yeah, and the 2050 target is an even more ambitious target, because that's every scope of carbon emissions.
In every element,
in every element, and that is a big challenge. Through the Church of England, we have tried to take a proportionate and a pragmatic approach by being clear what we're dealing with in terms of what's in scope at the moment, but also trying to focus on the things that we can have direct control over. This isn't about telling congregations how they need to live their personal lives. This is about focusing on the buildings that are in our care. We would hope, as part of our witness to creation through our activity, that will make people just stop and think, what changes could I make in the way I live and the impact that I have on the world? And that's part of our fifth mark of mission in terms of safeguarding creation.
And where churches have such a big role in their own communities, it's, as you say, people within the community might see what the church is doing and put that into practice in their own life. So there's so many ripple effects of this, isn't there?
Yeah, and we have no idea how far those ripples can spread out or how big they can be. And that'll be one of the great things to see, is what does this generate in terms of spin-offs and other ideas and suggestions for how we can improve the programme in coming years.
We've obviously been really privileged to support you with this strategic grant over the next couple of years towards a certain element of your net zero programme. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about the Demonstrator Churches project, but also how it could inspire churches of all denominations across the UK in terms of putting those practical steps into practice.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with Demonstrator Churches is get some exemplar projects up and running relatively early, around the country, different churches facing different issues, and to support them in making progress in reducing their carbon emissions and moving towards net zero. And we want those to be exemplars that are close to other parishes to go and see, so that they can learn from and be inspired by what our demonstrators are doing. We've just assessed the first round of nominations that we received towards the end of last year. I've just signed off on the first grants for those, so the first churches hopefully will be receiving their grant offers but very soon. And we want demonstrators to be those beacons that others can learn from. And the power of this was brought home very clearly to me in going to look at a church in Bristol, St Matthew's. And they put in some infrared heating chandeliers in the ceilings. Other parishes got to hear about it, and at the last count, I think it's something like 460 visits have happened to that church because people have heard about it. If we can replicate that around the country, then we can really encourage and motivate people, and hopefully provide some support through the programme for further net zero interventions. And it's brilliant that Benefact are supporting us in that, because your money, which is topping up what we're making available through the programme, means that we're able to offer for the churches that are moving towards capital works, we can contribute something like 43% grant to the cost of those works. Many churches aren't quite at that stage yet. They know they want to do something, but they're not sure what it is, or they've got an idea, but they've not nailed it down yet. And so we've got another pot of funding which is available for project development. But in this current phase, we're only likely to be able to support 1 to 2, maybe 3 churches in every diocese, because we want those examples shared, spread around the country, so that there's a church near you that you can go and have a look what they're doing.
As you say, that's the real power, isn't it? That obviously it's great that you're supporting these individual churches, but if they can be, as you say, beacons, examples for other churches, organisations to see how you can really practically put things into practice, then that's a really big takeaway from it, isn't it?
Yeah. And for some churches, I was at Portsmouth Cathedral looking at cathedrals, they've been able to do some really creative things for not a lot of money to get a better understanding of how their building performs. So another piece of advice I would give really is try and understand how your building works, and where the hot spots are, where the cold spots are, how long it takes to warm up and down. And the Sheffield Diocese are doing some great work with sensors in some of their churches to understand how they work. And that can really help you get a sense of, right, where do we need to focus effort, so that you're not pursuing projects that at the end of the day aren't working as you'd expected. And what we really want to do is, in addition to reducing carbon, we want our churches to be warm, welcoming spaces. And if we can find ways to heat them efficiently and in an environmentally sustainable way that makes them more welcoming, then that's supporting our mission as a church. My own church, we've put portable infrared heaters in because our oil boiler is notoriously unreliable. But that makes it a much more welcoming space, and we can move those heaters around as we have different events or at different stages of a service on a Sunday, for example. So thinking creatively and trying to come up with novel ways of doing things can work. And that hasn't cost us a lot of money to do that.
Yeah. And do you find this is something they are really personally passionate about as well? The sort of climate change, making these moves towards net zero, what we can do as people to make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have a responsibility to try and tread lightly on this earth. And so this role has been a fantastic opportunity for me to bring my professional career, which has always been around environmental and built heritage conservation and caring for our world, trying to make it a better place, aligning that with my Christian faith. It's a real privilege.
We've touched upon it, but I wonder if you could expand on what the creative solutions are for churches and what value this can add to them.
Yeah, it's a good question, because many people, when they think about climate change and making net zero, trying to move towards net zero, people immediately think of, I need solar panels on the roof, or I need an air source heat pump or ground source heat pump. And they're incredibly expensive interventions. And some churches, and the larger churches and cathedrals, will definitely need something like that. But there are lots of other simple initiatives. Moving to LED lights, for example. Some churches are looking at heating the people, not the building, if they have smaller congregations or perhaps are only open a couple of times a week. So heated seat cushions or under pew heating. Some churches are looking at zoning their building and creating a space which can be kept warmer than the rest of the church so that meetings can be held in there. There are issues around getting the necessary consents and permissions, but some churches are being really, really creative in that way.
And it sounds like they're also really considering, which is really important, the benefit to the community itself and not just the church.
Yes, and obviously if a church can find ways of being flexible and heating the space efficiently, or having an area that's zoned that can be warmer, then that allows churches to offer outreach into the community. One or two of our Demonstrator churches that I talked about that have come forward in the first round are wanting to do just that. They're wanting to create a warm space in the church so that mother and toddler groups can meet there. They can run community activities and events from those spaces in a much more warm and welcoming way than they would do if the church was colder. And if we can do that in an efficient way through carbon reductions at the same time, then that is achieving our ambitions through a net zero program, but also that missional outreach and connection to community. We know that for many young people in our communities, climate change is a key concern, quite rightly. So this is also about making the church and keeping the church relevant to younger people and future generations, so that they can see and understand that we care about the planet as much as they do.
I was wondering what the collective impact will be on different communities, as this is a national project where people are all working together for this common goal.
Yeah, I think it's that point about everybody playing their bit and the contribution that they make in their parishes and in their communities, collectively with all the other bits, adds up to us making real progress against that global carbon footprint of 415,000 tonnes CO2 equivalent every year. So everybody can make a contribution, how big or how small, it doesn't really matter. We want everybody to be part of this journey. At times in a community, it can feel, and I know this from talking to staff working at a diocesan level, to feel a little bit isolated if they're the only one who's the net zero officer or the environment officer. So we've been putting support into dioceses to help them recruit new net zero roles to support what we're trying to do at a national level, because it's the dioceses and the parishes that are going to be the engine room of this programme. And we're trying to build a community so that people feel they have got colleagues and allies and they're part of something bigger. And that's one of the big aims we hope will come out of this early phase of the programme, that people will feel if they want to do something, they know where to turn for advice and support, either at a diocesan level or at a national level, and know that their contribution is actually making a difference.
Yeah, that's really important. And you saying having specific net zero officers in different locations, it just grows pockets of expertise until it grows into a much bigger thing where everyone feels like confident and comfortable in terms of implementing different things and working towards that common goal. Yeah.
And we had a first Net Zero Carbon Connect conference here in Gloucester in March, supported very gratefully by Ecclesiastical Insurance. But that brought together colleagues from around the country to talk about what we're doing through the programme for the first time. And the energy in the room was brilliant, and people really valued the fact that we were coming together as a community to share experiences, to share challenges, to share problems and ideas for how we solve them. And we're trying to create that community and expand it more broadly across the church.
Thank you so much. That's been incredibly insightful, and it's been really good to understand the work that you're doing and the work that everybody can do in their own little ways to make a difference. So thank you very much, Julian.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Beyond Funding. Like I say in every episode, it would be great if you could subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels so you don't miss out on future episodes. And you can find out more about Benefact Trust at benefacttrust.co.uk.